Welcome to the studio and welcome to Ask Wallimann episode 3, a series of videos in which I will answer your questions. Now these questions were submitted by viewers just like you. And if you would like to ask a question, there's a link below. You need to join my Backstage app, and that's where it all happens. It's all free. You could just upload your video question, just like the fine gentleman that did that, and I will feature you in a future episode. Let's get started right away. Question number 1. This first question is from Bilbo.
How do I effectively use the Locrian mode to make music?
First things first, what is the Locrian mode? The Locrian mode is a scale, and it's a scale that is extracted from the major scale. And it's a tensed scale, a tensed mode. It sounds kind of tense. Now, what makes a scale sound the way it does? It's the intervals of that scale. Let's take an E Locrian mode. We've got 7 notes here. If I just play it like that, you don't really hear that Locrian mode. I mean, yeah, you hear a series of notes, but you're not really hearing the mood of that mode. In order to hear that, you need to hear it against something else. And that will create the attraction between the notes you're playing and the root note. Or sometimes it's a series of chords, sometimes it's just a drone. But basically now, if I play that Locrian mode against an E, you're really gonna hear how tense that is. Right? So it's a pretty tensed mode. That's the first thing. Now there's another thing I really need to clear up, and then I'll answer your question, but take a look at this. This right here is that Locrian mode that I played. I played it in E, which means that this first note is an E, and I'm gonna tell this software, which is Neck Diagram, I'll leave a link below, that this is a root. This will give us the blueprint of the scale, which is made of a root, 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7. A lot of flats in there, which makes it tense. Now, because of the way the guitar is built, I could play the same pitch on different strings, different frets. Like that 1 is also happening here, 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 here. There's a lot of 1s, there's a lot of 2s, and eventually what I can do is fill in the whole fretboard with that formula. So I'm gonna do that right now. Thanks to this software, I can do this. And now what we have is all the possible notes of E Locrian. Now you asked, how can you use the Locrian mode to write music, to play music? Well, first of all, no matter how hard you hit the notes, you're never going to sound Locrian unless the chord progression you're playing over is a Locrian chord progression. And yes, those do exist. So how do you write a Locrian chord progression? Well, you simply highlight random notes from the Locrian mode, maybe this one, this one, this one, this one. Weird chord, but why not? And if I play these notes on my guitar, that's the chord I have. Yes, it's pretty tensed, but it's extracted from the Locrian mode, which explains why it's tense. That chord can be part of a chord progression that you will use to create something Locrian. And you can just be creative. Highlight any of these notes and you will eventually have a Locrian chord progression. Hopefully that makes sense, but that is in essence how you would use the Locrian mode. Now a lot of players think they're using the Locrian mode because they're just using the position that looks like Locrian. That is never going to sound Locrian because it all has to do with the chords you're playing over. All right, next question is from Carlos.
My question for you is, I've heard professional players talk about pedal points, but they don't really explain what it was. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that or anything, how that could be related into our playing, and if it's really a thing.
It is a thing. That's a great question, and it's very much related to what we just talked about with the Locrian mode. A pedal tone, and there's different words for it, a drone, a pedal tone, or there's other wordings, is basically an ongoing thing in the back that is going to attract everything else. So this could mean a single note, And what it does is that it attracts everything to a common thing, in this case, a bass, and that really brings out the mood, the color of the scale you're playing with chords. It could be done also with single notes. And you might hear that on maybe an intro of a song or maybe a solo. But typically, you wouldn't just hear a single drone like that, a single note, because that's usually carried by the bass player. And it would be hard to ask a bass player to just play that throughout the whole song. So typically, the bass player might change that into a riff that he loops over and over. And that happens a lot more than you might think. And this really is helpful when you recognize that that's happening, to get a sense of what a mode sounds like. Now check this out, it happens in this song. Check out the bass line. Recognize that, right? The wall, the last section of the wall, the bass player keeps doing that, which can be kind of considered like a drone or a pedal tone. And on top, you'll hear the organ doing the changes. So you'll hear, I think the first one is something like this. And then you might hear, I think he's doing something like that. And then. Kind of hard to play those chord changes with a bass, but that's a very practical example of what that pedal tone is and does. So I would highly suggest you go back to The Wall, the song, and just listen to that end section, and you'll hear it. You'll hear Dorian, because everything is attracted to that riff, which is pentatonic, but because of those chords that are played by the organ in the back, you will really get a sense of the mode. The mode's mood, which is Dorian in this case. But that's what a pedal thing is. It's very useful when you're composing, when you're writing with a band, and that's basically what it is. Next question is from Christian. Let's hear what he has to say.
Assuming I know the melody, how do I quickly harmonize and find the chords? I mean, systematically and quickly.
It's a great question. You see this right there? Yeah, I'm losing my hair. Yeah, totally random, but I read that that's an after effect of COVID. I mean, I always had a little spot, but this is getting really bad, and I got COVID on January 1st. And 3 months after, typically you lose your hair. That's what I heard. I think it's happening to me. Okay, back to the question. So that's a tricky question, but here are my thoughts. Let's say you have a melody like this. All right. That's our melody, and we want to harmonize that. Now, there are tons of ways of harmonizing. Typically, when we start learning that, we will try to extract from the scale from which the melody is extracted from 7 different chords. You know, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. That's okay, but that tends to be a little overheard. Put that aside for a sec. Let's take a look at our melody. This is what I played. I'm in that zone of the fretboard. You know, think E minor pentatonic, right? So I started with a bar here on the first 2 strings. I had the 12th fret on the second string, 12, first string 12, 14, 15, descend, and then 15, and then back to 12, something like that. And I realize you asked me how to quickly harmonize something, but I think it's important to go through these steps. Let's say you're writing something and you're playing something and okay, that's a melody I want to harmonize. Well, you're going to start by trying to tie that to a scale that you know. It doesn't matter what the root is, as long as the root that you choose is a possible root within the type of scale that you're playing with. In this example, I'm going to decide that this note, E, is going to be the root. So I could tie this to a minor pentatonic scale, like I said. But I also have this additional note there, right there on the first string, 14th fret, which is not in the pentatonic scale. But it could be in Dorian, which is basically a minor pentatonic scale with an additional 2nd and 6th. Or it could also be Aeolian, because both of these options have the notes of my theme. Now, because I am the composer here, I'm assuming that we are writing a song, and that's the only information we can go off of, those particular notes. I've got to make a choice. So let's say Dorian. Well, that's where I'm going to show you on the software, but this should happen in your mind. You should map out the Dorian mode or scale, however you want to call it, all over the fretboard. In this case, we are in E Dorian. And this right here is my Dorian mode. And you can see that within the Dorian mode, we had the theme. Na, ba, 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 back to 2, 2, 1, flat 7, 1. So the theme does fit my E Dorian scale. And here, just like we did for Dorian in the first question, you can just randomly select some notes and play them on the fretboard. Maybe we'll start with this one, which sounds something like this. And maybe we'll have another one that is maybe this one right here. Sounds like this. Now those two would be perfectly valid options as far as some chords that would match that theme. So I realize it may not be super quick, but it's quicker than you think, and it's a lot more creative. It's a matter of kind of visualizing on your fretboard in different positions the scale from which is extracted your theme. In this case, we decided it was going to be Dorian, and just randomly, truly randomly, play some notes from that. Start with random, because that will lead you to new discoveries, and it's always going to work. Add to that, you know, the pedal drone thing that we talked about in that first, or in the previous video, previous answer. And that will lead you towards a path of discovery that is really, really cool. So I hope that opens new doors. That is my goal in this answer. Next question. This question is from Pete.
David, would appreciate your comments on how to play smoother arpeggios or incorporating them with walking bass lines. Occasionally we use them both for jazz or blues, slide, and they're kind of synonymous sometimes. We'd appreciate some novel techniques or new techniques on how to smoothly play the arpeggios or incorporate the walking bass lines together.
Man, you always have challenging, good questions, Pete. First things first, I would really encourage you to simplify things. Work on this with super simple things, like maybe 2 chords. Let's say that we have the following 2 chords. Maybe A minor, the bar version, A minor 7, and that position here. And then pick another chord. Now, the other chord doesn't have to be part of the same scale. It really doesn't matter. The thing that does matter, though, is try to find a chord or a chord shape that is in the same zone of this, of the fretboard here. You don't want to have a chord that is too far out. Something that is kind of close. So maybe we'll have A minor 7, and then maybe you'll play something like this, which is a C sharp minor 7. Randomly picked. Kind of sounds okay, actually. I kind of like it. But if it doesn't sound okay, that is completely fine, because you're working on something. So you got your 2 chords, you're visualizing them on the fretboard, and from there you're going to try to extract some arpeggios. So the first chord, A minor 7, you got your arpeggio here, which is 5, 8, next string 7, next one 5, 7, next one 5, next one 5, next one 8, next one 5, next one 8. It looks kind of like a minor pentatonic scale, right? Except that you are not having the perfect 4th here. So that's your arpeggio shape. Once you have that, look at the next chord, which is a C sharp minor 7, and find the arpeggio shape that would fit that zone of the fretboard. Okay, write them down if you can, on maybe print out some blank fretboards and write those 2 arpeggio shapes down. Had to do the bend there because I missed the notes. But so you've got those 2. Then I want you to explore and give yourself the freedom to try to start without any worries of tempo or anything like that, start a phrase in one of the arpeggios, the minor 7 one, A minor 7, land on a note, and then ask yourself, this note right here that I landed on, is it also found in the second arpeggio that I have? If the answer is yes, stay on it. If it's no, find the closest note to that landing one and go on that. And in essence, what you're doing is building phrases that transition between one chord to the next, like that. That is a super smooth way of doing it. And I'll just switch to my lead tone here, and you'll be able, if I do it correctly, to hear the chord changes without needing to hear the chord changes, just with my melodic lines and my choices of arpeggio notes. So see what happens here? You heard it there, right? And then I'm transitioning. And back to that A minor 7. You heard the change there, right? And it could be as simple as just 3 notes. And I think that's the best way to create smooth melodic lines. It has nothing or very little to do with technique or speed or anything like that. It's just choice of notes and anticipating that change. But I highly suggest you start with 2 chords, randomly picked in the same area of the fretboard, figure out these arpeggios within that area of the fretboard, and start developing some very simple phrases. The next question has a lot to do with that, so I think that'll help you too. Let's check it out.
Hi, David. First of all, thanks for your great lessons. You got me playing my first solos, my first improvised solos, which is wonderful. I never thought I could do that. But I still got a question for you. I have a blues backing track over here. It's in D major, G major, and I cannot figure out which chords to play the solo over. Can you help me please with that? Thank you.
Typically in blues, you're gonna have the basic 1, 4, 5 chords, and those correspond to scale degrees. So if you have a major scale, for example, you'll have 7 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you built the chord from that first note, you'd have a major chord. From the 4th, you would also have a major chord. And the 5th, you would also have a major chord. And that's typically how those blues tracks are built. There's a lot of exceptions, but I'm going to assume that that's what we have here. I happen to have a backing track here in G. It's a G major blues. This backing track probably sounds very familiar to the one that you're referring to. And we have that form there, the 1, 4, 5. Here's the 1, the first chord of the song, G, which is a major chord. We'll make a G dominant 7 with an additional flat 7. Here's the C7, same deal. That's the 4th degree of that major scale. And then back to the 1. So it's a very traditional form, right, of blues. It's probably what you're having. Here comes the 5, by the way, which in this case is going to be a D7. Back to the 4. Now the question is, what do you play over this? Well, first option is just G minor pentatonic. It's always going to work. Even though some notes will clash, that's what makes it kind of bluesy. It's always going to work. Every once in a while, if you want, you can change that flat 3, which clashes, to a major 3rd by raising it a little bit with the bends. And you hear that a lot with players who kind of like do a little thing to that note to make it right. Right? Now, if you want to progress to something maybe a little more refined, you can think of those chords as they're happening. And you can play the arpeggios, just like we talked about in the previous question. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to blend the minor pentatonic scale with a little weird thing to make the minor 3rd major, and I'll focus on the arpeggios of the chords, like this one. Now I'm back to the first chord. The 4th, which is a C7. I can add minor pentatonic. and then arpeggio. The idea is to really anticipate when the chord is going to come so that it doesn't come as a surprise. And on the turnaround, which is this, you can basically play whatever you want. I better stop now because I'm going to be stuck in this for hours. Okay, we have a final question. This one is from Shinobi.
Hey David, Shay here, also known as Shinobi. Got a question. Could you show us some good techniques for using suspended chords for creating movement in a chord progression?
Those are my favorite chords. They're so mysterious and eerie. So first things first, what is a suspended chord? A suspended chord, which is called sus, is typically followed by a number. And that number is either 2 or 4. So sus2, sus4. Well, let's talk about triads first. A triad is made of 3 notes. We'll have a root on the 4th string, 7th fret. That's going to be A. So we're building an A triad. A triad has typically a 1, that's the root, a 3rd, which can be major, that'll be a major chord, or minor, and a 5th. So a major triad here in this position would be starting on the 4th string, frets 7, 6, 5. A minor one would be 7, 5, 5. All right. The 3rd really determines the nature of the chord, right? Anytime you have a major 3rd, whether it's a chord or a scale, it makes that musical thing a major thing. If you have a minor 3rd, which could be a chord or a scale, makes that thing minor. So we have a triad, major triad, minor triad. A sus, like I said, could be sus2 or sus4. It's basically replacing the 3rd, which can be major or minor, with either a 2nd, which in this case would be here on the 3rd string, 4th fret, or a 4th, making this chord kind of ambiguous. You don't know if this sus4 or sus2 is major or minor, because you could replace that major triad with a sus4 or a sus2. Same goes with the minor triad. It could be replaced with a sus4 or a sus2. So that is what sus is. You could replace any chord with a sus chord, sus2 or sus4, completely up to you. Typically, the 2 is going to be a major 2. Every once in a while, they might be minor, depending on the degree of the scale. Same with the 4th. You're typically going to go with the perfect 4th. Sometimes it could be augmented, depending on the placement of that. And that gets into modal stuff. Lydian will have a sharp 2. But that's kind of the idea. And one of the things that I really like doing, and that helped me get more familiar with the sound of those sus notes, is to have a pedal drone, which we talked about earlier, like E, for example, easy, right? Open string. And then just play some sus notes. Let's say that you're an E Dorian. Map out your whole Dorian scale on the fretboard like we did previously, and just play some sus notes, sus chords. Beautiful, right? And so forth. It's kind of an exploration game, but basically that's what sus2, sus4 is. My recommendation, even though it's not super cut and dry, is just to explore your fretboard. And again, one of the best ways to doing that is to use a software like Neck Diagram, or just print out some blank fretboard sheets and map them out manually. It might sound like it's a waste of time because you're doing it on paper, but it really helps you make the connection with your mind and what you're seeing, spending time writing that down. I hope that's helpful. If you want your question to be featured in the next video, it's right here. Join the Backstage app. It's completely free, and I can't wait to hear your question. I'll see you in the backstage.